They don't come here to attack us because we're rich and we're free. They come and they attack us because we're over there.
We don't need to go populist left or populist right. We don't need to embrace neo-Marxism or neo-fascism, these disastrous movements from the 20th century. Turns out the answer is pretty much our Bill of Rights, our story. Embrace freedom. That's the answer.
And if the LP has a purpose, it's not to put people to sleep. It's to wake them up.
We're here because we love liberty, and we're here because we hate injustice. We are here to save mankind. We are here to fight.
Join us, the Libertarian Party, in perhaps the most exciting, grandest endeavor in history, the restoration of American liberty.
Ideas spread, they can't stop them. An idea whose time has come cannot be stopped by any army or any government.
Hello and welcome to episode 66 of Decentralized Revolution, a podcast from the Libertarian Party, Mises Caucus, and Mises PAC. I'm Aaron Harris, and I'm your host. Really sorry it's been a while since we've had a new episode up. I've just had a lot of scheduling conflicts with guests and just stuff in my personal life, but things should be picking up soon. I've already got the next episode recorded, and I know you're going to really like that. It's with Janine Eunice, who is on Twitter is called Lefty Lockdown Skeptic, and she's been doing a lot of great work, an attorney fighting some of the COVID tyranny. My guest today is Karlyn Borysenko, who has, some of you know her. She's recently been saying some nice things about the Mises Caucus on her YouTube channel, her podcast, which is called Unscrewed. One of her, I think she may have one more podcast, but she does have one along with someone else called Unscrewed. And she went through and talked about our platform and just why she was attracted to all that, which is really good. I'll link to that on the show notes page at decentralizedrevolution.com/66. But Karlyn is a very accomplished and successful within her field. She's an organizational psychologist, written a very successful book called Zen, Your Work, and it was published by Penguin Random House, which is obviously a major publisher. And up until very, very recently, she was a lifelong Democrat. And we get into all of that. I thought it would be great for us to get to know her a little better since she's taken such an interest in us. So I hope you enjoy our talk. Karlyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Aaron.
It's a pleasure to have you on. I didn't really know who you were until very recently. A couple people in the Mises Caucus said, hey, you should check her out and maybe have her on the podcast. And I went right to you have a podcast called Unscrewed, right?
Yeah, I do. My friend Truman. Yeah.
Yeah. So I listened to that and the episode where you guys talk about the Mises Caucus and kind of read our I forget, I'm blanking on what we actually call them, but like what we believe.
The platform.
The platform. And I really appreciated, it's nice to hear someone who maybe doesn't know a lot about something, but who's interested. And it was just nice to hear your reactions for you guys discussing that. So I just wanted to thank you for doing that episode and for being curious about what we're about.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So, I mean, my whole story, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, is that, I was a Democrat for 20 years before I woke up and realized just how insane everything was and how much the media had lied to me. And I bring that up because it's like one of the things I've really tried to do on my red pill journey is like to keep an open mind. It's been a learning experience for me. It's been a growth experience. I have not yet completely reversed engineered all the ways in which I was lied to throughout the course of my life. And to be honest, I probably never will. But one of the things that on my journey, I remember like in 2020, I was traveling around with the walkaway campaign, trying to get Democrats to leave the party and, basically stumping for Trump because I think that Trump was the better of the two options. And I kept asking the Republicans and the GOP, I was constantly frustrated with them. I was like, what is your platform? what do you stand for? And they were always like, we just want people to leave us alone. I'm like, that's not what you want. You need to create a platform. You need to create a plan. Like, there has to be goals that are clearly articulated. And the GOP platform had not been updated since like 2012. And so this was like and I'm telling the story because this was like a constant annoyance for me all throughout 2020. And when I eventually sat down with the Mises Caucus recruiters in New Hampshire, Eric and Ben, they basically handed me that pamphlet with your platform. And I was like, oh my God, if the libertarians of like all people, if the libertarians can clearly articulate a platform and a vision when the GOP has been unable to do this for almost 10 years now, like this is something that I need to pay attention to. And so it really was. I mean, people think that everything has to happen online and be fancy and all that. It really was a paper pamphlet that was handed to me at a bar one night that got my attention.
That's really great to hear. And I'm unlike you, I'm an ex-Republican. I like to say I'm a recovering Republican. I haven't voted for one of them since like 2008. But, you know, I got very frustrated with the sort of the same thing you're getting into, is that I basically found out that although when they talk to their base, they do talk about things in a more ideological way, in terms of right and wrong, philosophically, but they never follow through on that stuff. And then I figured out that, you know, I think platforms, by the two major parties, I think those are still kind of like done at conventions, but I don't think they even pay attention to them anymore because they don't matter. They're a different organization. I don't think they want people to know really what they're about. Whereas libertarians are kind of obsessed with being right, not in the sense of, oh, I'm being right because you're wrong, but I think libertarians really have this obsession with the truth and wanting to know what is the right thing to do. And so I think it's natural that we kind of do that and put our views out there. And, you know, and I'm not, the Libertarian Party platform is actually pretty good on that. And at our conventions, we, debate things and actually make changes. But unlike the other two parties, like we really care what it says because we try to live up to that.
Yeah, you guys are like sticklers. I mean, it's so interesting to me, like the different cultures for all the different political parties, because I feel like I've been through like the gauntlet of them in the past couple years. And the libertarians, you guys are absolutely, I'm sorry, I'm not saying this just to kiss up, absolutely the most well-read, the most well-educated, the most attentive to detail. That was one of the things that was just really interesting to me when I started getting involved. It was like the amount that people pay attention to bylaws, nitpicking every little thing. And I don't say nitpicking in a bad way, but just like being very thoughtful about why are we doing this? Like, what is the purpose of this? How is this going to be used? It's an interesting dichotomy from like the other two major parties.
Yeah, it's we want to, for the most part, libertarians do want to hold ourselves to our agreements. And, you know, there's, and I don't want to get into that, all the inter-party stuff today, unless you have questions or want to get into it. But like, it's when people don't follow the agreed upon rules that things get contentious. On the other hand, I'll never forget, I was at the 2012 convention in Las Vegas, the Libertarian Convention, where they nominated Gary Johnson for the first time. And back then, 2012, like phones are a lot more, common today. Like every single person has a phone, a smartphone. Back then, maybe not everybody has a smartphone and all that. So like an iPhone was something that you were worried about getting stolen and stuff back then, I think more so. And right outside the convention hall, every time you go to like a big event like that, there's always a premium on electrical outlets, got to charge your phone. And in the hallway right next to the big convention hall, with nobody watching, there's like a power strip with like 50 phones hooked up, and people trusted other libertarians to not steal their phones, right? And it's just all laid out there. And I thought, there's not too many other places where I think people would feel comfortable doing that, but because we're obsessed with, private property and respecting other people like that, they just automatically thought, okay, I'm safe leaving my smartphone in a hallway for anybody who wants to grab it, because I know nobody will. So.
Yeah, that was honestly I had a very similar experience at Pork Fest. I went to my first Pork Fest this past year, and I loved it. I can't wait for Pork Fest to be here again. I'm so excited. But that was one of the things that was another thing that I noticed about the culture of it. It was like there was very little theft, even though you're at this campground. There aren't really rules. People can do whatever they want. There are men with guns walking around, and you feel totally safe with it. And it was like, it was funny. I remember actually there was a moment at Pork Fest where I think it was like Dave Smith's thing, where of course everyone's crowding into the pavilion to see Dave Smith. And like what I saw as someone who, again, like I'm still very, very new in this, but this is when I was like really new. I felt like I was watching what the Democrats think communism would be like. It was people working together. It was people helping each other. It was like people bringing chairs in and stacking chairs up and just doing it naturally. And it was like, this is what, I mean, and it's an interesting dichotomy, because it's like, you think of libertarians, you think of like these people who just like, leave me alone, but it's more than that. It's people that are that are voluntarily entering into a community with people and acting as though that's something that they want to protect, and acting as though that's something that they want to take care of. And it seems like a small thing to say, like watching people stack chairs was like an interesting thing, but in that context, for me, it was.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, critics of libertarians, like I remember all the way back to college, I had a professor, I said I was a libertarian, like, oh, you guys just want to be atomistic, right? You think everybody is this own little thing, and you don't. And I was like, why would you think that? But I think that we do a bad job sometimes not highlighting the fact that most libertarians I know are not in this and don't keep like a lot of people come to it because they run up against the state in something and they think, hey, this is wrong. Then they get into the ideology. When other libertarians talk to other libertarians, it's not about, oh, I hate what the government won't let me do. It's usually, I'm upset at what the government is doing to these people, who can't defend themselves or this or that. And so I think in an odd way, libertarians are actually almost very altruistic, because a lot of us work very, very hard for very, very little return, because we want to see life be better for everyone. And I wish, and I think that some of that's starting to change, but I think in the corporate media, it's always going to be, when we're mentioned at all, it's going to be, oh, they just, read Ayn Rand and play around with Bitcoin, and, they don't care about anybody else. And that's not true. So, as you know,
It's very much not true. And even within, even within the GOP and the conservative circles, they don't even have a good idea of what you guys are about either. It's like, and this was part of the problem for me when I was waking up, because I felt like I I always knew I was not a conservative. That was not an option for me. There are just like more like I'm pro-choice. There are some things that conservatives do that just really bother me, and I never felt at home in that community, even though they're very nice people. Like, enjoy my time around them. Very nice people. There are many conservatives that I'm dear friends with. But then it was like, okay, like do I even belong in a party? Because I was perfectly fine being an independent, to be quite honest. And then everyone kept telling me, they're like, Karlyn, you're a libertarian. And I was like, I don't know about that, because the Libertarian Party kind of sucks. And remember, this was during the 2020 campaign that I was waking up and I was starting to explore things. And it was within in touring around with the Walkaway campaign, we did rallies all over the country. And one of the rallies that we did was in Dallas, Texas. Well, that was a really fun time for me, because a Black Lives Matter mob chased us down the street and tried to attack us, and the police did nothing to help us in Texas. And I went viral and was on like Fox News getting chased down the street by Black Lives Matter and all this stuff. And the reason I bring that up is that it was almost around exactly the same time that Joe Jorgensen tweeted Black Lives Matter. And I was like, oh, hell no. And so that was my impression of the Libertarian Party, was their presidential candidate is supporting this woke social justice stuff. Now, of course, now I know that it's much more nuanced than just that. But that was the perception that I had of it at the time, and I think that's the perception that a lot of Republicans have of it. I think it's the perception a lot of MAGA people have of it. I think it's the perception that a lot of walkaway, kind of like politically homeless people have about it. And it's just it's what I've been trying to articulate to people is like, you've got to look closer at this because there's more nuance and there's more going on here than you think.
Right. And unfortunately, most people really aren't concerned with nuance or being right or whatever. And that's unfortunate. But, you know, you've already used the term red pill. Libertarians are the ones who talk about that a lot. And so it is very hard to, I think we always have to maintain our perspective with people and try to not, you know, get too angry or, you know, at people who haven't been woken up yet, because it really is a process. And I wanted to talk about kind of your process. You mentioned you've been a Democrat for about 20 years. So when did you start getting interested in politics and take that up to I think most of us kind of know what the walk away movement is, but you know, why did you find yourselves there, and what else did you find among people who found that movement?
So I got really into politics. I mean, honestly, when I was in college, or like at the end of high school and in college, and this was when George W. Bush was president, or George W. Bush got elected when I was in college. And so I didn't like that at all. I didn't like the direction and the way things were going. And so at that point in my life, I was really invested in it. I was blogging about politics. I mean, it's actually kind of funny. Like MySpace back in the day, MySpace was like the place to be, but MySpace actually had a really powerful blogging platform. And I was actually one of the top political bloggers on MySpace. It's like I was getting like so many views a month, it was ridiculous. I'm like this 22-year-old like just spouting off on the internet, but I was really just like obsessed with it. Fast forward to 2008, Barack Obama gets elected president. I breathe a sigh of relief, and my brain shut off to politics at that point. It was just like, okay, the Democrats are in control. Things are taken care of. Like, I don't have to worry about this anymore. And I really stopped paying attention. I started living my life. I was in graduate school at the time. I was starting a business. I was trying to build a business. I wrote a book. I did a PhD. I was just like living my life and being a normal person, and frankly, not really paying attention to what was going on. All that I really knew of was like what I saw. MSNBC was almost the exclusive news source in my house for a while, just because, you know, to be honest with you, it was very consciously about me being in an echo chamber. I didn't want to be challenged. I was like, life is hard enough. I've got all this stuff going on. But when Donald Trump got elected, I didn't see it coming at all. I was shocked, like so many people were. I cried. I was like, I was absolutely devastated. Like, how could this happen? What is going on? And you know, but I wasn't as bad as so many of my friends. Like, so many of my friends just lost it, had absolute mental breakdowns. And I was kind of like, I don't like this, but I believe that the country is strong enough to survive like a bad president. And, you know, it's going to suck for a couple of years and it'll be fine. Well, my friends just kept freaking out. And then, you know, a couple of years into this, so I'm a knitter. You can see all my shawls behind me. I'm actually like knitting right now.
I thought you were. I wasn't.
You don't want to be rude and ask when people are knitting. No, I am actually knitting right now. So when I really started to wake up, it was when social justice started to come in and take over the knitting community. And it started with like,
wait, I got to hear that sentence again. Yeah, that's a great sentence.
Social justice warriors started to take over the knitting community. I mean, you remember those pink pussy hats? Where do you think those came from?
I guess the knitters. You're right. Yeah, why didn't I think of that? Yeah.
It was actually a concerted campaign by the knitters. And so they were running around threatening people, trying to get them to use their language. They canceled a woman who was planning a trip to India and wrote a blog post about it. And they were like, you're expressing colonial ideas. So she had to write this big, long apology. They canceled someone who was supporting her. They really, like, the thing that really got my attention is one guy on Instagram posted a poem asking for kindness and empathy in the knitting community. And they thought that was tone policing. So they canceled him so badly that he actually ended up having a nervous breakdown and going into the hospital on suicide watch. And so it sounds like kind of funny, but it's also like, this was a serious thing. This was thousands and thousands and thousands of people raining holy social media hell down on this guy. And at this point, like, I did my PhD in industrial organizational psychology. I focused on workplace bullying and how people cope with bullying. So I studied bullying for a really long time. I know bullying when I see it. And it just reached the point with this where I was like, these are people I politically aligned myself with, and this has gone off the rails. And so I just made like a simple post on my Instagram saying, this is the definition of bullying. And then they all started coming after me. And so it just kind of like escalated. And it was like, I just started looking at things differently. And there were people kind of covering the chaos that was going on in the knitting community. And so I started watching that, and they started talking about the social justice ideology and the woke ideology and where this came from and what it is. And it was the first time that I really kind of connected, oh, these really bad people are aligned with this party that I'm a part of. And I don't know if this party, like, has the party changed? What's going on? It's an extremely confusing time when you're red pilling because you literally do not know what is real and what is fake. And so I purposefully started to challenge myself. I was like, just listen to people that you think you're going to disagree with. Go onto YouTube and just watch videos of people who you think are the most horrible, vile people in the world. And it started with me with a walkaway video. Actually, I had heard about Walkaway on MSNBC, and Rachel Maddow assured me that they were all Russian bots and that it was totally fake. And I watched this Walkaway town hall, and it was totally real. And I completely identified with everything that like Brandon Strzok and Blair White and the other speakers that they said about like they were uncomfortable with what was going on. And then my husband was like, Karlyn, you should watch Ben Shapiro. And I was like, no, Victor, Ben Shapiro is Satan. And so I waited for Victor to leave the house one day, and I like locked all the doors and made sure all the shades were drawn. And then I turned on Ben Shapiro, and I was like, he's really not that bad. Like, I don't agree with everything he's saying, but like he's not the worst person in the world. And so I kind of
except on Israel, but go ahead.
Oh, well, I think I also don't like him on vaccines and masks, but but like he's not like a bad person, right? He's not like part of like an evil empire or anything. So this kind of kept going on for a couple months, and then I live in New Hampshire, which is the land of like the first primary in the nation, and so like throw a rock, you'll hit a presidential candidate in New Hampshire during primary season. And Donald Trump was coming to town the day before the New Hampshire primary. And I was like, you know what? What greater challenge in this universe than to be a Democrat going to a Trump rally? And so I went to the Trump rally. I stood in line. I even told some people I was a Democrat. And they were like, oh my God, we're so glad that you're here. It was like the most welcoming, awesome community. The Trump rally was totally fun. It was like these people were just like, they were not what I had been told that they were. And so I kind of came back to my house the next day, and I wrote this article about my experience being a Democrat at a Trump rally and just put it up on Medium, which is a website that I didn't ever even use. But like, I was just like, I just need this out there. Like, I just needed to write about this experience. And mostly because I wanted my friends to see it and be like, these people they're not bad people. They just believe different things. Like, we have to stop hating each other so much. I thought the article was going to get like a couple hundred views. It ended up going really, really viral. And I had like 3 million views in like a week or something, and like was just tweeted by like everyone and their mother and like Don Jr. and like all this stuff, all the Fox News people, all this. And so at that point, I was kind of launched into being in the public sphere, which is never something I thought I would do. But that's then how I connected with the Walkaway campaign, and actually started doing events with them all throughout 2020. And just like, it's been like a constant learning process for me. I don't think it's one of those things. I think it's one of those things that I will always be unpacking the level at which I've been lied to. It's funny, even like a couple months ago in my locals community, we do like Zoom calls in my locals community where we just chit chat and talk about stuff. And we were talking about the Unabomber's manifesto one day and how people had read it and kind of like what he was thinking about. And I had to stop them. I said, was I lied to about the Unabomber? Can someone tell me what the truth is about the Unabomber? Or was I lied? Because that's like the level of like, I go back through everything and I'm like, what was I told in this case and what actually happened? So it's a constant ongoing journey. I'm not sure if I actually answered your question. I was just kind of rambling.
No, you very much did. And I want to kind of explore again from someone who came from the Democrat side of things, and our listeners will roll their eyes because I tell this particular little story a lot. I went to college in the early to mid 1990s, and my professors back then were all very, very liberal, but they were kind of ACLU anti-war liberals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was what I grew up with as, okay, that's what Democrats and liberals are for. You know, I was a Reagan kid, but I eventually kind of came around when I read Murray Rothbard. At some point, and I think my theory is it started to happen around the Occupy thing.
Mm-hmm.
Is what happened that the Democrats, that the liberal Democrats of 40 years ago, who were, pro free speech, pro civil liberties, even some of them were pro gun, right? Like I just remember on that side, they were all very good. How did this woke thing come in? And how did it, to the extent that it ruined the knitting community, right? Like how do we get so far so fast?
Yeah, I mean, the thing of it is, and this is actually what I spend a lot of my time doing these days, is I'm very active fighting back against critical race theory and all of this stuff. So how it came in was through the schools. It's all been through the schools, and this has been going on for decades. And it started in colleges and universities, and that's the main place that most people were indoctrinated. But it's really made its way into K through 12 schools right now, and that is where a lot of this stuff is taking place. And it is the reality right now. I mean, this is why I am very active in terms of school choice. I ultimately think that public education should be abolished, but in the meantime, we can put some stopgap measures in place to at least give parents choice, give them more ability to homeschool, whatever they want to do. But ultimately, I believe that the public education system is unsavable purely because of the indoctrination that's going on in the schools. And the thing of it is like, it's not even a matter of identifying specific teachers that are doing this stuff, because they're all doing it. Every single teacher, well, not every single, but almost every single teacher teaching in public schools today is not only bought into the social justice ideology themselves, but they were taught to be a teacher by professors who are also bought into the social justice ideology. So it's like, this is a generational problem to fix. So it didn't come overnight. It's just really been escalating in the past several years because they've been going younger and younger and younger, and they've been getting more effective because of it.
How have they been getting more effective? What's working on, okay, they lay the foundation when people are in, even elementary and high school, and then certainly through college. But how has that, is it just those people, or is it winning converts outside of that? Is it someone who was 40 years old 10 years ago and a Democrat? What would have weaponized the woke stuff for someone like that?
Well, I think there are so many different factors of this. So there's not one single factor in it, but I absolutely think that, what they're teaching in the schools primes these kids to, it is so bad right now in the schools that they're actually teaching kids not to see information that is directly in front of their face. To be able to see a piece of information and to not even be, and to flip a switch in their brain where they don't recognize it as that piece of information. So they're teaching this to kids in elementary school right now. It's called social emotional learning. It's super fun. But bigger picture, it's not only just what they're learning in the schools from the time they are 4 years old up until when they graduate from college. It's now being reinforced in the workplace, which is actually how I really started getting into this stuff. I was more concerned about stuff going on in the workplace with these critical race theory trainings before I actually got into what was going on in the schools. It's also being reinforced by the media every single day. And I think that Donald Trump's presidency just accelerated all of this. I think that if Trump hadn't won and hadn't completely disrupted their paradigm of a system, we would be having a much different conversation right now. I think they would have continued a slow, gradual escalation. You know what it was? It's kind of like what they were doing was they put the frog in a pot of lukewarm water and they were slowly bringing it up to a boil so that the frog didn't even notice the temperature in the water was changing until it was too late. What happened when Donald Trump got elected president is they were slowly bringing it up to a boil, and then Donald Trump flipped that switch over to high. And it was all of a sudden, it's like, we're off to the races, because they knew. And it wasn't about Trump specifically as a person. This was about a non-establishment person disrupting their little party. Because, something I try to impress on Republicans all the time, the GOP is exactly the same as the Democrats. They're exactly the same. They're in cahoots. They're working together. And it's like, it's one of those things that Trump, like, the GOP hates Trump, hates him just as much as the Democrats do. But he disrupted their little paradise. And as a result, it was like they had to start escalating what they were doing. And of course, the media is falling for it. Hook, line, and sinker is their propaganda machine every single day of the week. And a lot of people, just like I was one day, are just not paying attention. And I do think there's a lot of people who cannot be woken up at this point. They're too far gone. I look at some of my old friends. Oh my God, I made the mistake of interacting with some of my old friends on Facebook today. It was like, I do not even recognize them anymore. They are not capable of looking at objective information and thinking for themselves. It's really disheartening. But I do think that there is still a big population that are primed to be woken up. And to be quite frank, I think that the Libertarians and the Mises Caucus specifically actually has a really good case to make. Like, this is like prime recruiting season, because I think a lot of people who wake up and red pill, they don't just run over to the conservatives, because the conservatives are no better. To be honest, they're not offering fundamentally different solutions. And so there has to be some place in there you could say, you know what? We just want to live our lives. We want to be good people, and we want to be successful, and we want to make money, and we don't want to pay taxes, and we don't want to do all these things. Like, no one likes paying taxes. Come on. And I think there's just a golden opportunity for that with people who are waking up.
I listened to one other episode of Unscrewed, and the two of you were talking about, kind of how to talk to someone who is just starting to wake up. And I thought your take on that was really good, both of you. So explain how you can, somebody who's just starting to ask questions and they come to you, you're a libertarian or otherwise red pilled. What's the process then?
I mean, how I generally approach it, and I don't actually remember what I said, so it is conceivable I might say something completely different this time around, but I think that it's a matter of, don't focus on politics. I think the biggest mistake people make is in trying to convert people. And what people need to understand is that waking up is a long, slow process. And there is so much cognitive dissonance that goes on where you're trying to reconcile what you believe is true about the world with all of this new information that you're being shown. So you have to be extremely patient sometimes with people who are waking up. It's really difficult to do this on social media, especially Twitter, because Twitter is like a war zone. Twitter is like just people fighting all day, but like that's not conducive to helping people wake up. You have to be patient. You have to allow them to come to their own conclusions. You have to approach it in a way where it's like, it's not about our particular political tribe in any way. When it comes to the stuff in the schools, what I advise parents to do is to focus on the school assignments. Focus on what these kids are actually getting. Focus on the surveys that these kids are being made to take. Go to your neighbors and just show them the information. Don't talk about Trump. Don't talk about Biden. Don't talk about DeSantis. Don't talk about Kamala Harris. Just focus on, here is what they are teaching our kids in school. Here is a book that is in, hang on. Sorry about that. Here is a book that is literally in schools right now that is depicting children performing sexual acts on other children. Are we okay with this being in our school guidance office? That's a real example. Are we okay with students who are being told by their high school that they need to admit that they are an oppressor because their skin is too light in order to graduate from a high school? That literally happened in Nevada. Are we okay with state departments of education saying that children start to become racist at 3 years old? That happened in Arizona. Are we okay with parents who are speaking up at school board meetings being called domestic terrorists? Are we okay with these things? And just focus on what's actually going on and give people the time to process that information and to take it in, because I do believe, and especially when it comes to people's kids, the kids are the best way to wake people up right now. We just saw that in the election that just took place in Virginia. When it comes to people's kids, they're not going to mess around.
And hopefully on the vaccine stuff, that'll be the case too. And I want to get to vaccine COVID stuff. Let's go back to that. You mentioned this book. What's this book that you said is a real example with the...
Oh, dude. Okay, so social emotional learning is all about grooming kids. This is like legit grooming. And there is a book, and I don't remember the title of it offhand, but Moms for Liberty and Parents Defending Ed have been talking about it. But this was a book that they actually found in Virginia classrooms. It's a comic, and I don't know how lewd you want me to be on this podcast. It is literally depicting a child giving a blowjob to another child in a comic in schools.
How... Yeah, that's bad enough, but is it fairly graphic too? I mean, is that okay?
It is literally depicting.
It's not just implied. Yeah.
No, it is not implied. There is full. You can. There's dick. You can see dick in the comic.
Wow. So, what's the story on that? How did it get there? And what did the school system say when this came out?
So this is something that they're trying to normalize in school. They're trying to normalize explicitly sexual material in school libraries. I mean, I'm not in favor of banning books at all by any means, and I do think the conservatives go too far with this sometimes, but I'm not in favor of explicitly sexual material being in public K through 12 schools. And so this is going on in the libraries right now, and they prime kids for this. So social emotional learning is this new thing people are going to be hearing out. It's tangentially related to critical race theory, but it's a different thing, in which they survey kids, and then the responses to those surveys are attached to their student records. And then the schools perform psychological interventions based on the responses to those surveys without telling the parents that they're doing it. So some of the questions that schools might be asking, and people need, if you have kids in the public schools, first off, get them out if you can, but if you can't, make sure they are opted out of every single survey, and make sure your kid knows not to answer surveys, because some of the questions they're asking are things like, what is your gender identity? They're asking this of like elementary school age kids. They're doing things like putting a gender identity graph on the chalkboard where they have boy at one end and girl at the other end, and they're saying, where do you fall on the gender identity spectrum today? All this information is being recorded and associated with the students' records. They're asking kids what their sexual orientation is. Now, I'm old enough to remember a time that people were allowed to come out of the closet when they were ready to. I'm even old enough to remember a time when Pete Buttigieg did not come out of the closet until he was in his 30s. Like, this is in schools right now, they're trying to make kids come out of the closet when they're in elementary school. And so they're engaging in all of these grooming behaviors. They're trying to normalize sexual content in schools. And I hate to pull like the pedophilia argument, because I think the conservatives way overuse it, but I just don't know how else to describe this. It's really, really disturbing. And I think that this is part of one of those things. And by the way, I have no problem with trans people. I have no problem with gay people. I don't really care. Do whatever you want to do. It is none of my business. But I do think that this is one of those things where they're trying to teach children that there is no objective truth. There is no man. There is no woman. There's only non-binary. You can be whatever you want on any given day. And they're doing this at such a young age that it's getting ingrained in their head, and it's going to really screw them up.
Yeah, well, okay. So the CRT stuff, I've read a little bit about the roots of that, and you're right. Yeah. It's ideas that started in academia even 50 years ago. They've gradually percolated throughout, and here they, here's where we are today. I'm like you. I don't care what adults do with other consenting adults, but I am pretty, I'm pretty, something just doesn't sit right with me of anything about trying to talk to kids, the sexual, if it is grooming, right? Like, I mean, where is this coming from? Like, why is, I think a sex education class on the biology and all that, maybe, in public schools, but where does this other stuff come from, and why? I mean, I think it's somehow linked to, again, the the trans stuff, like, we never talked about this until 3 years ago, and now it's like, a number one issue. There's something, I mean, I hate to sound, like a conspiracy theorist, but I think you're right that there are people who not only want to get at the notion of right and wrong, but of the family and stuff like that. So
Yes.
Is this just the same sort of, warmed over Marxism that the CRT is, or?
Yes. You just hit the nail on the head. It is the same warmed over Marxism that CRT is. One of their explicit goals is the destruction of the traditional family. And what people need to understand is every messed up thing that is going on in our society right now is tangentially related back to this. Critical race theory has kind of taken center stage in terms of like, it's one of the things that we're talking about the most, but critical race theory is just one part of critical theory. Right? Critical theory is an overarching, it's an overarching academic ideology. There are way more than critical race theory. There's critical gender theory. There's critical queer studies. There's critical trans studies. There's critical disability studies. There's critical fat studies. If people want to really have some fun, go look up critical fat studies, because this is like, you think critical race theory is crazy. Critical fat studies is a whole new level of lunacy that people are just like completely unprepared for. But the entire goal of this, and listen, like on my YouTube channel, every single Friday, I do this stream called Happy Hour, where we watch these trainings, we watch these presentations of these different things, and we like make fun of them. But the ultimate goal of this, it has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with gender. It has nothing to do with sexuality. It all has to do with power. What all of this is, it's about fundamentally destabilizing the system, because these people hate capitalism. They hate capitalism. They hate capitalism worse than the LNC. They hate capitalism. And it's like that is their ultimate goal, is to use all of these things to destroy capitalism by destabilizing society. So everything that we see going on right now, whether it be vaccines or COVID or climate change is going to be next, or any of the critical theory stuff, it's all about capitalism.
Well, I think you're right, but I'll go one step beyond and say I think the real motivation is that they just want to be in charge, right?
Yeah.
Like that if we were a theocratic society, they would be against, that. If we were another type of society, of course, the Marxism stuff is obviously historically related to the relationship to capitalism. But I think at the bottom, it's just people who want to enforce their way of living on other people, right?
That is exactly right. Critical race, I say this all the time on my channel, critical race theory is not about race, it's about power. Yeah. And as soon as it's really funny. So we had an anti-CRT bill here in New Hampshire. It was introduced by a state representative. He's actually a Free Stater in New Hampshire. He's part of the Free State Project called Keith Ammon. And so Keith was doing like all these interviews about the bill and doing all this stuff. And I remember explicitly that he called me one day after an interview where New Hampshire Public Radio had completely thrown him under the bus in this interview. And he said, "Karlyn, I see the bigger picture now." And I feel like there's a moment for people in this, that there's always a moment when you're able to zoom out and understand that this is only about attaining as much power as they can and punishing their political enemies so badly that they opt out of the game entirely, so that the people who are doing the punishing get more power. I remember explicitly when I had this realization, it was last summer when I was reading a book called In Defense of Looting. And of course, this is when all the Black Lives Matter riots were going on. And this book was publicized all over the place. It was on NPR. It's written by a trans person, of course. But this book is essentially about how all of the looting that was going on during summer of 2020 is totally acceptable because property rights are racist. And if property rights are racist, then capitalism is racist. And so therefore looting is good. And I was like, oh my God, this is literally just about how can we gain as much power as possible, no matter how crazy our argument is.
And isn't critical studies, and I'm actually reading James Lindsay's book about this, and have read, there's a pastor named Vodi Bauckham. I read his book called Fault Lines about it, and he goes into some of the roots of critical theory. It's my understanding that it's all about power, right? They're obsessed with talking about power. So I think it is like, to me, it's as clear as day, right on the face of it, that these are people who don't have power. They don't have other qualities that would help them reach power. Like they're not come from a wealthy family. They're not this, they're not that. They're using what they have to become the people they hate. They want to be in charge of the people that they feel have been in charge. Like, am I right about that? And if that's not it, what is critical theory? Let's back up because again, it's a term that people talk about all the time, but there could be different levels of understanding about what it is.
So I think you're pretty close. I will say that I am not the expert on the origins of all this stuff. I leave that up to James Lindsay because he does such a wonderful job of it. James Lindsay is an invaluable asset, and I've learned so much from him. But like where I focus mostly is on the practical application of this stuff. Like, how does it show up in the real world? And it's kind of like the debate about like the difference between the academic study of something and how this actually impacts real people's lives. I do think that you're absolutely correct that it is about power. Like Marxism in general is all about the oppressor versus the oppressed. And, if you you don't want to be the oppressed, right? So you have to figure out a way to gain more power so you can put you in the oppressor role. But of course, the people who are pushing this, they never take the time to think that they are literally putting themselves in the role of the oppressor. They're becoming the monster that they're fighting. But I will say, though, is where I think you were a little bit off is saying they don't have powers, they don't come from wealthy families. A lot of these people do come from wealthy families. Yeah. And it's like rich, liberal, and I shouldn't use the word rich, progressive white women are like the ultimate nemesis of every good value that we have. I swear these women, they tend to be some of the most racist people that you will ever talk to in your life. I continue to be shocked at the language that I hear coming from woke, progressive white women. But I will say this too, it's like, I do think that the vast majority of people pushing this ideology, I really think they're just useful idiots. They don't know what they're doing. I think there is a very small percent of people who are pushing it that absolutely do know what they're doing. They're pulling the strings. I'm talking about people like Ibram X. Kendi or Robin DiAngelo. They absolutely know exactly what they're doing to maintain their power. But most of the people, they're just foot soldiers. They're asleep. They haven't been given the opportunity to wake up yet. And I know a lot of these people, they think that this is what they need to do in order to be a good person because that's what the media has told them. And it's a sad thing. And it's one of those things that I hope people, I know it's hard, and I know that I rag on these people as much as anyone on the planet. It's basically what I do all day, every day. But at the same time, it is a sad thing. It is a sad thing that we have a huge chunk of our society that has been lied to by every single person that they trusted to tell them the truth, to the point where they're not capable of thinking for themselves. They're not capable of looking at information right in front of their face. Or I shouldn't say they're not capable, because they're perfectly capable. They're just choosing not to do it because it doesn't serve their life experience. They think they're going to get, and I went through this. I lost all my friends. I lost my family. I lost everything. I lost every single thing I had spent years of my life building when I accidentally went viral for going to a Trump rally and saying these people aren't monsters. So there are very good reasons that a lot of times people aren't speaking up. And I think that the more that we can create communities that can welcome them in and give them that opportunity to, the more people we're going to see raising our hands and saying, I'm not okay with this.
So I'm interested in what you just said about your friends and family. Like how does that work? How does it feel to be on the in the middle of something like that? And how did it happen? I mean, what happened and what, how did they let you know that wasn't okay?
So right after my Trump rally article went viral, I got invited. First of all, if you've never gone viral on the internet, it's essentially like a bomb has gone off in your life and it has an uncontrollable force and you don't know what way is up and what way is down. A lot of people play people, there are grifters out there for sure, but I really didn't plan this. I had no idea this was coming. And so it was a surprise. And so I was in this state where I was just like, what is even going on right now? at that time, Fox News invited me on to talk about my article and to talk about my experience. And I was trying to get a hold of my mother for like 3 days. I'm like, this is what's going on. Like, I did not hear hell or high water from my family when this was going on. I was like, so I was trying to get a hold of them. Like, this is what's going on. This is what's going on. Leaving all these messages, sending text messages. Finally heard back from my mother about a half hour before I was supposed to go on Fox News. And she was like, well, Karlyn, these people are evil, and I just don't even know why you're bothering to do this. And of course, that's exactly what you want to hear before you're about to be on like national television talking about your story, right? And so, like we talked afterwards, and she seemed to understand, but then it all hit the fan when Glenn Beck read my article on his radio show, and my father hates Glenn Beck and has always hated Glenn Beck, and it was just like it reached the point where I was incapable of even having a conversation with them. And the same thing happened with all of my friends. And these are people that, like, some of my friends, I had a group of friends called the Kittens that we were just very close women. We'd always been, helpful and supportive of each other. I literally have a kitten emoji tattoo on my ankle that I got with these women. That's how close we were. I've gone on road trips with them. I have gone to their grandmother's house for dinner. And it was an instant. It was boom. Nope, you're not in the club anymore. And I don't know, like, I cannot describe to people how alone you feel when this happens. It's like you can't trust anyone. I still have trust issues with this whole thing, and I think it's part of, honestly, this is another thing that I really love about the libertarians, because when I started hanging out with the libertarians in New Hampshire and like the LPNH and the Mises Caucus in New Hampshire, like, they were open and welcoming. And even for months, even when I first started hanging out with them, like, I was like, what do they want? Do they just want for my platform? Like, what is this? And it was honestly the first time in like a year that I was able to hang out and spend time with people that weren't attacking me, weren't trying to cancel me, that didn't really want anything, that just wanted to do stuff and to we had similar goals, we had similar aspirations. And so, it is a really hard thing to go through to be canceled by your friends and your family. But what I will say too is that it's so much better on the other side. People are so afraid of what it's like to be canceled that they don't allow themselves to say what they really think. Now, looking back on it, it sucked at the time, but I wouldn't give up my entire journey for anything, and I wouldn't give up my ability to say exactly what I think right now. And I might say stupid stuff sometimes, and sometimes I might be wrong, and sometimes I might look back at something that I tweeted 3 months ago and be like, that was stupid, and you shouldn't have tweeted that while you were stoned. But like, that's just part of the process. And I think that, it's so much better to be able to speak out and to speak openly than to hold back what you think.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. I still want to try to understand a little better about okay, so these friends of yours and your family would do something so quickly, and it sounds like they didn't even bother to like ask you about your motives or anything like that, right? No. So what is happening? I mean, I hate to I'm not saying this directly about your friends and family, but like, what is it about what's going on in their lives that such an ideology and a way of looking at people could take hold in them to the point that over an abstract idea, they're gonna turn on like a friend? Like, what, one would hope and one would think that your friends and family are the most important, things in your life, that unless they do something really horrible, you're there for them. I guess I may have answered the question there, but like, why do they, again, how did that take hold in, you mentioned the, white upper class progressive women, like what made them susceptible to all this?
I mean, I think that, I think Gad Saad writes about this in his book, the parasitic, what is it? The Parasitic Mind. I apologize if I misquoted that title. I think that's what it is though. I think that they view, like, I became a Trump supporter, right? And I don't have any regrets about that. I never thought Trump was a perfect person, but he was definitely the better of the choices. And, you said, why would they turn on you unless you did something really horrific? They viewed that as the most horrific possible thing that anyone can do, is to vote for a politician. That was viewed as the ultimate betrayal, the betrayal to everything that they believed in. And so it was that single act. And it took me months, by the way, to become a Trump supporter. They actually abandoned me even before I came out and said I was voting for Trump, because I wasn't sure for a while. I was like, I'm just not going to vote. But like, they abandoned me even for just going to a Trump rally, for being around these people and for saying that these people are not bad people, they're not Nazis, and we should probably extend a little bit more kindness and empathy to them and to try to like mend the divide. That was viewed as the ultimate betrayal. And I think that that is reflective of this ideology, where it is all or nothing. It is my way or the highway. It is an ideology where if you deviate from it even the slightest little bit, you're going to get called out and you're going to get a stern talking to, and they're going to try to put you back in line. It is an ideology about power and control, and they will stop at nothing to make sure that anyone who defies them is punished in some way for defying them.
Is it just that adhering to this ideology and this, is it just that it makes them feel welcome, that they feel part of something? Is it like it's almost like a tribal thing? Like, again, why would you, I wouldn't think about, I have friends who are very liberal and otherwise, and I wouldn't think about cutting them off because of this. Like, do they need a sense of belonging that bad that they are going to turn into these type of people?
I don't even know that it's about a sense of belonging, because I don't know that they have belonging. Because can you really have belonging with a group that could cancel you at any second? Like, can you really be comfortable? I don't think that's what it is. I think there's a lot of fear. I think that people are hyper aware of cancel culture. I think, it's funny. My friend Aaron Keinsvatter, who used to work at the University of Vermont, and he kind of was a whistleblower to talk about, like, the University of Vermont is crazy in the amount of woke stuff that they're doing. But he was a professor there, and he started speaking out against it. Liberal guy, but he was telling me that he was experiencing so much anxiety based on what his university was doing and these woke policies that they were implementing. He would literally throw up on Sunday evenings in anticipation of having to go into work. Like, it really does. It makes people sick. It's debilitating. I think there are so many people experiencing massive amounts of anxiety against speaking up. And what they don't understand a lot of the time is that, many of the people who are not speaking up, it's not because they don't disagree with what's going on. I mean, I hear from people all the time who are vaccinated but disagree with the vaccine mandates, but are refusing to speak out because they don't want to be called anti-vaxxers. Like, it's so crazy. So I think that there is a very high level of fear because they see that there is a very high level of repercussion for speaking out. This is an ideology that will control you purely based on fear. But what people need to know is that they don't have any power over you if you don't allow them to have power over you.
Yeah. I want to talk about kind of corporate America, and I think that your background as an organizational psychologist, tell us a little bit about that, about how corporations, again, maybe before the woke stuff, or at heart, how do these organizations operate, and why did the woke stuff kind of come in there too? And I think I have a theory, but I'm going to let you take it. But I think it's interesting that the left still thinks, and you see in television shows or movies, that corporations are these conservative, anti-women, all this, that in pursuit of profit, that they will trample on liberal ideas, but when in fact it's kind of the opposite. But so talk about that. What are corporations, and how did they become susceptible to this?
Yeah, so I have been an organizational psychologist since, I started my business in 2012, so it's been a while, almost 10 years. I do corporate training. I created different types of training programs. I created a very successful manager training program that I did all over the country in all sorts of different environments. I created a very successful mindfulness program to infuse mindfulness strategies into the workplace. I would train on things like work-life balance and stress management and employee engagement and all of the kind of like the fuzzy frou-frou stuff. I was on the conference circuit. I was speaking at the largest HR conferences in the world. I was a keynote speaker all over the place. Around, I want to say it was like 2018 and 2019, diversity and inclusion started coming up at all the conferences. And I would get these calls being like, do you do workshops based on diversity? Do you do workshops based on belonging and how we can create these environments? And so it kind of started slowly. And, I was never a believer in diversity training in regards to like, training people to be nice to people with like different skin colors. Like that first of all, there's no evidence that this stuff actually works. Secondly, when someone is having an interpersonal issue in the office, it rarely has anything to do with the color of someone's skin. It almost always has to do with communication. I'm a DISC certified trainer. DISC is a workplace profile that is probably one of the most popular workplace profiles on the market. I'm fully certified in that. I'm an expert in that. And so anytime someone would ask me for like this diversity stuff, I was like, have you thought about DISC training? Because most of the problems you're having probably center around communication, not around skin color or gender or any of these things. And I have 100% of the time found that to be the case. Well, fast forward to well, first off, like two things happened at once, right? First off, there was the pandemic. And when the pandemic first started, it was like a couple of months after my article had gone viral. So I was already kind of in this weird space where I had gotten canceled by clients as a result of this article going viral. And I was I was like in a little bit of a rebuilding phase. And so I was doing these workshops where I was like, let's help transition your employees to virtual working environments. And what does it mean to be a manager in a virtual working? I was trying to be helpful. And so I did this whole coaching program around virtual work environments. And I swear to God, like a month into the coaching program, someone disrupted one of the coaching sessions. He was like, well, I just don't know why we're talking about this and why we're not talking about diversity and white supremacy. Disrupted the entire program, started yelling at me in front of the other participants in the program that I wasn't addressing issues of white supremacy. I was like, what is even going on? So that happened. But then George Floyd died. And I'll tell you, when George Floyd died, it was impossible to sell any training into any organization that was not woke diversity training. That was it. That was all that they wanted. And it was like, so, and they're not doing it because they believe in it. They all know it's nonsense. They know it's bullshit. They know that. There is no evidence that this stuff actually works. They're doing it because if they didn't do it, their employees would rebel against them. I have had numerous conversations with CEOs who would flat out tell me during 2020, not so much now. Now's a little different. But during 2020, I had multiple conversations with CEOs saying, we're just not hiring white men right now. That's blatantly illegal. You're not allowed to do that. But a lot of organizations are. And so 2020 was a really tough year for my profession. I do believe that they have fundamentally changed my profession. It is very difficult to exist in my space if you're not selling woke diversity training. Luckily, I happen not to make the majority of my money on that at the moment, so I'm not really that worried about it. So I'm kind of taking a little break, and hopefully we'll be able to return to my actual profession at some point when calmer heads prevail. I thought about trying to create like an unwoke training thing, but to be honest, I'm really bitter about all of this. I'm really angry that they've ruined my profession, something that I spent years studying and getting really good at. And I really do hope it changes someday. But right now, the corporations are driving a lot of this. The HR offices are driving a lot of this. And a lot of the CEOs, they're kind of like, the CEOs generally don't believe in this, but they're kind of keeping their hands off because they're like, I don't want to piss off the HR people. Let them play around with whatever they want. It's a giant virtue signal. It's not real.
Right. Yeah. Human resources departments are snake pits as far as I'm concerned, right? Am I right?
Yeah. I mean, more or less. Like, listen, I think that there are really good and well-intentioned HR people out there. I've never considered myself an HR person because I'm a psychologist first and foremost, but I just happen to work with a lot of HR people. I really do think that there are a lot of them that are just trying to do the right thing. But this is one of the professions that attracts people that I think are very susceptible to the woke nonsense. And I think they get introduced to it in college. If you're going to major in like gender studies in college, what job are you going to get?
Right.
Like, you're not going to be able to get a job where you're actually practically applying the skills you learned in college. So you have to get a job where you have to like come in and kind of like be an apprentice and figure it out. This is like a breeding ground for HR. Very few people study, no one wakes up and says, you know what I want to be when I grow up? I want to be an HR manager. No one does that. They're trained to do it in organizations. And so I think it's just like a perfect breeding ground to attract people that are in these more kind of like soft studies majors. And there's nothing wrong with majoring in that stuff. I don't really care what you do, but I just think it naturally attracts people that are attracted to that sort of thing.
Yeah. Another topic that you two were talking about on an episode of Unscrewed, and I'll link to that on the show notes page, is, kind of words, and how the left today uses words. And I know from, I thought it was really funny. You talked about, you have a dictionary from the 1940s, right? So
You want to see it?
Yeah.
It's sitting in my foot. Hang on.
Okay. Just as long, I hope it's a dictionary that doesn't, before they started saying imply and infer can be synonyms, but
I don't know. I haven't looked that up yet, but look at this thing. It's
great.
Huge. It's crazy.
Right.
I love this thing though. This is great.
There's got to be all kinds of racist content in that dictionary, according to today's standards, right?
Oh, well, yeah, but I wanted to get like an actual print dictionary because they're changing the definitions of all the words. So I have my 1940s dictionary. I have right underneath it a 1990s dictionary. And I started with the 1990s dictionary because I was like, there wasn't as much woke stuff going on in the 90s. Nope, I was wrong. I had to go back to pre-civil rights era to get that dictionary to actually have something that was accurate, because they change the definition of words all the time.
Yeah. So, and of course, the biggest of those words, I think, is racism. And my parents grew up in a generation. They graduated high school in the late 60s, so they're boomers. And racism was, I think most people agreed with, and rightly so, the basic message of like Martin Luther King, right? Content of your character, don't treat people badly because they don't look like you, right? Like, so people think that when they hear the word racism today, that's why I think people are so worried about being called racist, is because most of them believe that it still means that you think you're superior to someone else of a different ethnic group, but that's not what that means now. Equity is not what one, to me, like, I think it's a warning sign that if you meet someone and they use the word equity and they're not talking about like real estate or finance, run away from that person, right? So how are they using languages? And I think maybe we talk about the Mott and Bailey thing too, in regards to this, because I think the critical theory people are very, very, very clever. Their weapon is words, and the shifting meaning of them, and fighting these ideological battles with people who don't understand the battleground at all, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is that's very true. So they've changed the definition of the word racist. Racist now means, it doesn't even mean all white people anymore. It used to literally mean all white people. Now it's reached the point where it's like anyone that disagrees with us in any way is a racist. And the evidence I will cite is there was an article that came out. It was a headline in the Washington Post back in January that talked about multiracial whiteness. And basically what that's saying is that if you are not white, like you can still be white. Don't get it twisted, because whiteness is not even about skin color. Whiteness is about proximity to the power structure, the owners of the power structure. That's why in California, when Larry Elder had the gall to run for governor of California, there was an article in the LA Times that called Larry Elder, who is a very black man, a white supremacist. And so they changed the definitions of words based on what is going to suit them at any given moment. Right. You brought up equity versus equality. This is another great example. Equality is something I think we can all agree on, right? We want to make the largest number of opportunities available to the most number of people, regardless of your skin color or your gender or any of those things. It's about equality of opportunity. not a quality of outcome. When they say equity, that is a quality of outcome. That is a fundamentally Marxist concept that says we're all going to end at the same place, regardless of how hard you work, regardless of how you show up. Like everyone's going to get this. Everyone's going to get a trophy. Everyone's going to feel good. You will own nothing, and you will be happy.
Right.
That's what equity is, right? And they do this all the time. I fundamentally think that the war with the woke, for lack of a better term, this is going to be a war of language, because language is the thing that most people are going to find the most confusing thing to keep up with. And what people need to know is just, you have to just be aware that the definitions of things will constantly change. And this is why I have this old dictionary. This is why I actually collect old school textbooks. Actually, a lot of people I know, especially my locals community, like, we collect old school textbooks. I have an old school textbook that they used to teach in like middle school to teach kids how communism is bad. They don't teach that anymore. Right. But we still have records of these things. But like, I would strongly encourage like everyone, make sure you're collecting physical objects, because they're going to try to get rid of this stuff at some point, because as long as these things exist, they can't change the definitions.
Right. So, can you talk about the Mott and Bailey technique? Do you know what that is?
Give me an example.
Okay,
of what you mean.
I think
people use it in different ways, is why I ask.
Yeah, I think both of us kind of know what, because I've heard the exact same thing. People using it a little differently, but my understanding is that you put a concept out there, and then when somebody sort of comes against that concept, you're like, oh, that's not what I meant, right?
Oh God, they do this with critical race theory all the time. This is like one of their primary arguments against critical race theory. They're like, you don't even understand the definition of critical race theory. Of course, they are literally never able to give you a definition of critical race theory. Like, they're the ones who can't define it. This is what James Lindsay calls the ironclad law of woke projection. Everything that they say that you're doing is something that they themselves are doing. So can we define critical race theory? Of course we can. I can give you two different I'll give you James Lindsay's definition because it's the shortest. Critical race theory is the belief that racism is the fundamental organizing structure of society. They can't give you a definition of critical race theory, but they say that we can. The newest argument, by the way, against critical race theory that I really love, that came up after they lost the governor of Virginia, is they're now saying that critical race theory isn't even real. So again, it's like it's this exercise of like, they're trying to get people to deny something that's literally right in front of their face. They went around saying critical race theory isn't taught in classrooms in Virginia, again, in the Virginia election specifically. I literally have a video on my YouTube channel of an 8th grade class that was being taught critical race theory. And how they're doing it is they're saying, do you believe in the Pledge of Allegiance, when they say in fairness and justice for all? And the kids go, yes, we believe in the Pledge of Allegiance. And then they say, well, if you believe in fairness and justice for all, then you shouldn't like systemic racism, and you should want equity. And what if your friend needs 2 cheeseburgers to be happy, but you only need 1? Isn't it not fair to just give your friend 1 cheeseburger if they need 2 cheeseburgers to be happy? Because again, it's all about equality of outcomes. It doesn't matter what effort they put in or what's actually required. And so then the kids learn, yes, well, if my friend needs 2 cheeseburgers to be happy, it's only fair that they get those 2 cheeseburgers because we like equity, because we believe in the Pledge of Allegiance. That's how they're teaching this stuff in schools. It is one of the most insidious things that you'll ever see. But no, they do the Mott and Bailey all the time, where they say, oh, that thing isn't what you think it is. And it is a process of
it's gaslighting.
I was going to say that it is a constant state of gaslighting, and people have to be hyper mindful of like they're doing this purposefully. It is a purposeful exercise.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that it's funny that I was familiar with the term gaslighting a long time ago because of the movie. It's actually a pretty good old movie. But all of a sudden, like in the last few years, people started using this word, and I'm a writer and an editor, so like words are my thing. And so when something comes up like this, it's like, where did this come from? And it's funny, like you said, that it's coming from these people, the critical race woke people, but they're accusing everybody of gaslighting, but their whole debate technique, their PR technique is exactly that. So James Lindsay's right again on that.
James Lindsay is right about every single thing. Like, people just need to get used to a state of being in which James Lindsay is always 100% correct.
Yeah, I'm reading the Cynical Theories book, and when I'm done, I'm going to try to have him on. I just moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, and I think he lives here. And
he does live there.
My best friend actually went to college with him and kind of knows him a little bit. So it'll be nice to. I want to be well versed in as much as I can be before I approach him. But another example of a guy who came from the left and is just a sensible person and is not going to stand up for this. I think that some of this is personality based, and you being an organizational psychologist, like, is there, everybody kind of knows the Myers-Briggs stuff and all that. Like, is there a certain type of personality that is likely to be like you or James Lindsay on one hand, and then the pink crocheted hat wearing thing on the other side? Is it personality that might be at play?
Maybe. I think so to a certain extent. I think, Jordan Peterson talks about this where, he equates it to the Big Five. I'm not as familiar with the Big Five as I am with DISC, and I'm not as familiar with Myers-Briggs as I am with DISC, but I'm a little bit more familiar with Myers-Briggs than the Big Five. But anyway, it's like, so I think there are people that have certain personality traits that are more susceptible to this? Yeah, probably. There are people that are naturally more inclined to care about people's feelings, and they want to make sure everything's nice, and they want to make sure people are taken care of. And no offense to those people, but they tend not to be like the sharpest tacks in the box, and that's not a bad thing. I think everyone is what they are, but it's also like, if you aren't actively looking at what's going on, it's just really easy to be sucked into it. On the other hand, I actually think it's ironic, and this is something I actually write about in a book that I wrote that's coming out next year about this, is like so I actually think that the people who are leading the charge with the woke, they're much more like people like Donald Trump than they think. I think they're overtly power hungry. I think they're control crazy. I think they don't know how to exist in a world where they don't have control over something. It makes them feel really, really uncomfortable. And so in that sense, I think that they are very literally the mirror of the monster that they're trying to fight. And so I think that their personality I'm talking about the people who we see going up to like people in restaurants in the street and doing the fist, or like Antifa people who are generally crazy. But I think that anyone can be sucked into this. And I think that this is really important to understand, is I don't think that this is something that we can say, this type of person is more susceptible fully, because I do think anyone can be sucked into this. I think it's more a matter of, are you paying attention? And frankly, do you want to see? Because if people do not want to see, they could even be paying full attention and they're still not seeing. I think Bari Weiss is a great example of this. I'm ragging on Bari Weiss all the time because I think she's one of these people who made this grand gesture of quitting the New York Times because it was just too woke for her and all this stuff. And she's starting all these other things, but she doesn't see. She doesn't see how bad things are. I think Claire Lehman from Colette is another example of this. Like they may talk about, like there's a whole, it's so interesting, like the whole anti-woke community, there are all these little factions. It's kind of like the Libertarian Party where like all these different caucuses and factions and stuff. There are these different factions within the anti-woke community, and James Lindsay calls this crypto woke, where these people who, they don't like the woke stuff, but they really do not get the extent to which it is going on. They still think that they can fight it with an intellectualization, with just being rational, and that's just not going to work. These people are not interested in a discussion. They're not interested in a rational analysis. They're not interested in being lectured to by a college professor unless they want it, unless they specifically really like that college professor or his name is Ibram X. Kendi. Right. So I think that the biggest thing that sets people who red pill apart from people who don't fully red pill is they have a proactive desire to understand the truth, and they are willing to challenge themselves and exist in uncomfortable situations, which is ironic because the woke say that all the time, but they don't really exist in uncomfortable situations. They always need their safe space, right. But they're willing to challenge themselves, keep an open mind, and to look at material at face value. They're willing to see, and they're willing to change their mind.
And I think that maybe what you're describing with Barry Weiss, and I think I've even heard Jordan Peterson say some things that I think he often says that he thinks like academia can be redeemed, right? Like, I mean, I think that there are a lot of people who don't realize the extent to which, it's like a rotten tree and, the bark looks okay, but you don't know exactly how rotten it is on the inside. There are a lot of people, especially people who came from academia, like Barry Weiss is, I think she went to, Columbia or whatever. And so these people are very invested, they get a lot of their prestige from it. Of course, Jordan Peterson was, and I like Jordan Peterson. He was had a very successful academic career. And so I think for someone like that, it's hard for them to admit that the whole thing is irredeemable. And we have to start over and build something else in its place. But
yeah. It's true. Barry Weiss and a group of like the like anti-woke people that I don't really associate with, they just made this announcement that they're starting a new college in Austin, Texas, called the University of Austin. And I'm just like, I understand the need to build new institutions. I'm fine with that. I think, I agree with that on some level. But I just think the whole idea is like a farce, because it's like, you're saying we need to build institutions and you're literally carbon copy of the institution that got us in this problem in the first place. And it's like, I have no problem kind of doing intellectual exercises about this, but I do think there is a fundamental disconnect between a lot of these like anti-woke people and the real world. Like you just said, like they go to the Ivy League schools, they're in their Ivy League clubs, this is where they get all their value from, this is where they get their self-worth from. I was never a part of that. Like I am very much like, I'm a rabble rouser. I am a fan of like the scrappy underdog and like the bad news bears and stuff like that. And so for me, it doesn't even make sense to exist in that intellectual world, because I just feel much more comfortable around like normal people and helping normal people and looking at how normal people are impacted by all of this stuff. I think fundamentally, a lot of these intellectuals, they don't interact with normal everyday people all that often. They truly have no idea.
There's something you also mentioned in one of the podcasts I listened to about how you like, decentralization. And obviously, of course, that's the name of our podcast, Decentralized Revolution, and that's what we're about at the Mises Caucus. But even, and not just politically, but again, taking your background as an organizational psychologist, you're talking about them trying to recreate the university and making it the same form. Like, talk about what the form of an organization takes, what effect that has on the direction they're going to go and how they operate.
Well, I mean, I think, to be fair, I think that something could take the form of a university and actually be really innovative. I just think it has to do with the leadership. I think the leadership, first and foremost, if the leadership does not understand what they're trying to achieve and how it must be fundamentally different, it's a matter of doing a deep dive into what got us into this mess in the first place. And I think, frankly, a lot of the intellectuals, I mean, we've kind of talked about it already. I think that a lot of these intellectuals have not come to grips with the fact that academia caused this problem in the first place. It was a lack of exposure to the real world and to the real people that are really impacted by these policies. And that's why I always try to focus, again, on like normal people, what's actually being implemented, what's actually going on in organizations, and that sort of stuff. So I think if you want to create an unwoke organization, I think decentralization is critical. I'm actually working on a project right now. I basically, with a group of my friends, we basically all got sick of this. We basically hate all journalists. Let me just lay brass tacks. We hate all journalists because we think journalists are like incompetent and not acting like journalists. And so we've actually started creating this like little decentralized collaborative where we're like, if the journalists don't want to go do real journalism, we'll go do it for them. And I think that decentralization is key to all of this, because it's like they talk about this with the Free State Project, right? It's like a hydra. You can't chop off all the heads to the hydra all at once. And like if you try to organize it in terms of the form of this university, which they're apparently going to spend $250 million to build a physical campus, which is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Like, this is not something that's going to be successful. You can easily chop off the head of this university, or even just by getting a couple members of their leadership team. But if you give people the tools in order to fight their own battles, like I want to do a whole thing where I want to have a series of trainers for parents to say, okay, how do you write FOIA requests? How do you talk to your teachers? How do you organize a parents group in your community? How do you talk? How do you wake people up? Like, I want to teach people how to do things so that they can do them themselves, because when you're empowering normal people, that is the answer to the problem that they cannot kill in one fell swoop.
Yeah, I'll have to talk to you maybe a little bit off air, and maybe Michael Heiss can talk too. We may have to see if you can give us a little advice too about how to train our state teams and all that to do that local activism. So you'll hear from me about that. So you mentioned journalists. I have a journalism degree, a master's from Northwestern.
Oh, I'm
which
sorry.
Is, you
went to a good one too.
Yeah, it's the best one in the world. And I was a newspaper reporter for a little while, but I basically agree with you. And it's funny, my closest friends, the best people from that program, they're not in journalism now either. And I think that I didn't really notice it at the time, but I not too long after I got out of grad school, I kind of had the epiphany that a lot of people who go into journalism, both from who come to it from very good schools and people who find their way into it because they're attractive and can be on TV news or something. Mm-hmm. I think they're basically lazy, and they're status seekers. They enjoy the status of being the reporter at the paper, the person on the TV who tells people things. And most people are not that driven. So I think that the groupthink is there. Journalists are particularly susceptible to groupthink because, there's no longer an incentive as an incoming journalist to come in and try to scalp some local politicians who are corrupt, right? The people in charge are not interested in exposing good old fashioned corruption. They're wanting to play the ideological game. So the people who really do want to do the work find that they can't do it. I mean, that's what I found. And I also found that, people wouldn't hire me because I was too expensive, and they'd hire somebody who just got an undergrad degree at Ball State or something like that. And, the quality of journalism, I picked the exact wrong time, 2003 to start grad school for journalism, because a lot of, some of the vestiges of the good things that those papers and stuff used to do were, they were buying those guys out by the time I started into it. So.
Yeah, journalism is such a sad state of affairs right now. And it's like, it's gotten so far away from informing the public of like what they need to know. And in conjunction with the critical race theory stuff and the unwoke stuff, like I will, a lot of people talk about the corporate media, the left-leaning media. I will rag on conservative media just as much as I will rag on the corporate media, because I think it's just as bad. Even these independent outlets, like I rag on the Post-Millennial all the time. It is such a clickbait rag. And it's like, it reached the point where a friend of mine who is this, he's a Mises Caucus member in Massachusetts, of all places. He's 23-year-old kid that got himself elected to school committee in his town because he's so anti-CRT, it's ridiculous. Actually was driven so insane by being on school committee in a couple months that he turned into a complete and total anarchist, which is like a whole other story. But we were talking, and it's like, he's been doing citizen journalism, just looking up what states, like how states are funding different social emotional learning initiatives, has found out that this has been all funded through the CARES Act and through ARPA. No one's reporting on this. No one is telling this information to parents. No one is showing parents, this is how your state is funding this, and this is what you need to look for. And it's like, these are the things that parents actually need to know. Yeah. And we've gotten to a place where journalism is only done on Twitter. They only care about Twitter and the blue checks on Twitter. And it's like, it's so maddening when you see what a game this all is. I'm so bitter about just almost all of the blue check Twitterati. I just find it to be disgusting that they went into a role where their responsibility was to inform the public of what they needed to know, and they're doing all this clickbait nonsense for likes and retweets, and they don't do anything of substance.
Right. And talking about, they decide what the public should know, and not what they need to know for, a healthy, free society to operate. And my number one example of this is the George Floyd stuff. Like I am the most anti-police person you can, possibly talk to. And I stopped a few years ago looking into, like, literally you could go online every day and find a new video of a cop shooting a dog, a cop shooting a person. And every week I think you can find something that's close to George Floyd, in that they're a black man or a black person gets killed in a fundamentally wrong way. So my question is, what was it about George Floyd that made them decide to run with that? Why aren't we having these stories every single week?
It was convenient.
Right.
That's the only reason.
Right. The cathedral wants to push a narrative. It was the right time because of COVID. Mm-hmm. This traumatic thing was going on. People were locked in their houses, and this happened. And I think that they're very opportunistic. Whoever's pulling the strings on this stuff, they see, okay, we need something to, or they, they'll see something that's, maybe there were local people protesting. Hey, we can use that to push this narrative. So the Black Lives Matter stuff. And I think that's it. So I think that most journalism, like, very seldom, and I don't read as much of it now anymore, but I think it's much more about deciding what to cover when, rather than like telling outright lies in stories,
Yeah, I think that the question people should be asking with any outlet is, what are they not covering and why are they not covering it? And then going and looking for yourself. Like I very rarely will actually get news from any media source. I go look at primary sources. I might look at, like, what are people posting about, what's like going on in the news, but I almost always will go to the primary sources and find out for myself. But I want to go back to the George Floyd thing, because I don't think that this was even just as much like an opportunity. I think that, it's so funny. At the beginning of the pandemic, I remember talking about this with a lot of people. It was like the woke went quiet at the beginning of the pandemic. And it was kind of one of those things where it's like, we know the kids are in the house, but they're not making any noise. Like, what is going on? It was like that level of eerie. And it was like, okay, so the world actually had a legitimate problem. At the beginning of the pandemic, we didn't know really what was going on. We didn't know how bad the thing was. The world finally had a legitimate problem. And so the woke looked pretty silly, like when they came out and they screamed racism for every little thing, because there was a legitimate problem. Now, as the pandemic wore on, they kept being quiet. They were quiet for like 3 months. And so what I think happened is, like, these people are addicted to anger. They're addicted to outrage. They're addicted to calling each other out. They're addicted to racism. And so we have all this pent up angst that's building and building and building and building and building. And I think it could have been almost anything. George Floyd just happened to be the thing. It wasn't like this was the only instance of something like this happening. It just happened to be that right thing at that right time. And they were all ready to go anyway. It was like, boom, like off like a cannon. And then they rained hellfire down on us all summer.
Right. And I think the whole notion of the cathedral, the reason why the media are such a good and useful part of that is that they can profit from they profit from, I was about to say selling papers, but obviously that just shows that I'm in my mid 40s, but they profit by people clicking, looking, listening to what they're doing. For that to operate, it doesn't matter what it is. But if in concert with the cathedral, they decide on a normal Tuesday to make something an issue, that generates the clicks where when a hurricane comes along or a COVID comes along, you don't need people. Like you say, they were quiet. They focused on this. Everybody needed to know things. Of course, most of what we learned during that time was false. But I think that's why the cathedral can play the media like a fiddle, because again, these manufactured things, not only do they benefit the ideologies of journalists, but primarily it makes them big bucks, right? So
yeah. I mean, this is how they make their money. If it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah.
That's how it's all about. Again, it's all about status and the Twitterati and how many followers do you have. And journalists get hired based on how many followers they have on Twitter now. They're incentivizing this. And I got to tell you, so there was a time, that it happened a couple months ago when I got attacked by a bunch of white identitarians, like real ones, and so I started thinking about how I thought that how people were covering critical race theory was like really irresponsible, because it was starting to stroke the flames of something that is actually a problem. Like, I believe in life is balance. Anytime you have a group of people that's running around saying it's racist, everything in their mother is racist, well, what's going to happen? Life is going to balance that, and you're going to have a group of people who are legitimate racists pop up to balance it out. It's just the way things work. This is actually happening, by the way. There is a movement. It's called the white positivity or the white well-being movement that is proactively recruiting from the anti-CRT movement. Anyway, that's a different story for a different day. But I started thinking about like how I was covering critical race theory and how I had to have a stern conversation with myself, to be honest, because like, listen, I was the person that broke the Coke Be Less White story. This is like the biggest unwoke story of like the entire last year. And it was all because, Coca-Cola was doing this training that literally had a slide that said, try to be less white. I put it on Twitter. It broke the story. They had to take it down off LinkedIn. It was all this stuff. But it was like, that was the moment where I was like, you can get a lot of leverage and a lot of coverage by covering the most outlandish possible things. And that's an example of that. And I got 27 million views on that tweet. Like that's cool. Like, let's not like front, like that's cool. But it's also not the most responsible thing to do to only and exclusively cover the most outlandish thing that happens on any given day, because it tees people up. It gets them addicted to this anger and outrage. It creates an addiction to creating clickbait. It's just a bad idea all around. And so I really had to have a conversation with myself at some point to say, it's not that we can't cover the outlandish stuff when it happens, but we also have to make it clear that what's going on with critical race theory and the woke is actually so much more insidious than a slide that says try to be less white. And I felt really guilty for a long time. I was like, did I do something to cause this white identitarian group to start recruiting from the anti-CRT movement because of the Coke Be Less White story? Because this made people think that critical race theory is just all about attacking all white people all the time, and that's all it is. That's not all critical race theory is. So I try to be really responsible in my coverage on it, and I really wish more people would do the same.
Yeah. One sort of final sort of topic I wanted to get into, and you've been really generous with your time, which I appreciate, is kind of coming back around to what we were talking about at the beginning, and that's the Mises Caucus and the LP.
Yeah.
And I was at the Orlando convention when Jo Jorgensen gave her acceptance speech. I don't know if it was her acceptance speech or like a speech before she was nominated, but I was very disheartened in that moment, because if you look at Jo Jorgensen's positions on things, she'll tweet, whether it's her tweeting or not. I don't think she seems like the type that would do her own Twitter account, but she's for legalizing machine guns. She's really good on all the issues. Like, she was Harry Brown's vice presidential candidate. If you don't know Harry Brown, for someone new to the libertarian thing, you got to look up some Harry Brown speeches. But so she's so good on the actual ticking the boxes of, the belief of what it means to be a libertarian. And she said in that speech, the famous, it's not enough to be not racist. We, not you or I, we as a party must be anti-racist. And I thought, that's that's a classic sort of Mott and Bailey thing, because who could be against racism, right? So, but so that's what, there's a significant contingent of people in the LP who, I think there are some people who are legitimately woke, culturally left, and very dangerous. I think there's a bigger group of people who are blue-pilled. The fact that they're blue-pilled means they think they have to play the game the way the media plays it, the way the cathedral plays it, in order to get respect. So they think if we're professional enough, we send out the right news releases, we dress the right way, we say the right things, that they'll eventually let our presidential candidate on the debate stage. They'll do respectful stories about us, and they'll let us compete in the election, right? And of course, to me, that's so obvious that that's not ever going to happen. So I think that there are a lot of people who are blue-pilled libertarians who think that to appeal to the zeitgeist, which is manufactured by the cathedral, that we have to at least pay lip service to the woke stuff. And that's where I think they go wrong. I think that for the most part, they're good libertarians. They just, I think, are so clueless as to how things are actually working. And that's, to me, I know that's a little soapbox here, but what we in the Mises Caucus are trying to do is trying to get libertarianism back to the basics, anti-central banking, protection of property rights, taxation of stuff, that type of stuff, and to not decentralization, to push all that, and to not think that. I think our message has to be as bold as possible, and we have to differentiate ourselves from how the other two parties do things for people to notice us at all, right? Am I right on that? I mean, I don't think we can play their game and win, right?
Yeah, no, you are 100% correct about that. And I got to be honest, I feel pretty lucky and blessed to live in New Hampshire. It's funny. I actually joined the LPNH probably about a month and a half before the LPNH coup was initiated. And I actually remember, I was actually I remember seeing the first messages come through on the Signal group being like, we got locked out of our Facebook account. What is going on? And it was like, so I do agree with you. I do agree that I think there are well-meaning libertarians. I will say though, again, I'm still a relative noob in all of this, but from an organizational perspective, the Libertarian Party is kind of insane. It is insane. And if it weren't for the Mises Caucus, I would have absolutely no interest in being a part of this insanity at all. To watch what the LNC has done to Karen Ann Harlow's, to watch what they did to watch directly what they did to the LPNH, to watch what they're doing in Delaware, to watch what's going on in Massachusetts, them trying to implement a code of conduct specifically to target the Mises Caucus. I think I would have probably agreed that this is just well-meaning error a lot more before all the coups started happening. And so I don't think I would have agreed with it probably a year ago. I don't know that I agree with it anymore, though. I think it is now a purposeful kind of war to say, to try to decide what this thing is going to be. And I do think the Mises Caucus will ultimately win. I mean, there's just the numbers are just there. It doesn't make sense not to. And I think that after Reno, I'm actually really excited to see what happens. I am really excited to see what happens in 2024. If the Mises Caucus can get control of things and start to level stuff out and to start to do the bold messaging. I mean, we definitely do bold messaging in New Hampshire. That's part of the shtick. That's part of why the New Hampshire coup happened, is they were upset about the tweets, right? I think that there's so much opportunity, and what people don't understand, and listen, I hung out with MAGA people all throughout 2020. MAGA people are not traditional Republicans. They're not traditional conservatives. I think that there is a rife recruiting ground in this community of people who do share the beliefs of the Mises Caucus. They just don't know. They don't even know that the Mises Caucus exists. They don't know that this is an option. All they see is Joe Jorgensen saying, we must be anti-racist and Black Lives Matter. I cannot tell you, when I first joined, I was hearing about that Joe Jorgensen tweet every single day from the walkaway community. Every single day. So it's like a single tweet being out of touch with what is going on in the world and how that's impacting people. Like that one moment, I think was a horrible branding failure. But I do think that there's a lot of opportunity, and I do think that most people are well-meaning.
Yeah. And I think that, talking about people who don't know about the Mises Caucus, and even, our name is kind of an esoteric name, like who's Mises and what's a caucus, right?
Yeah.
But that's why, we're trying to, we use the takeover language. At first I was like, I don't want to be saying that stuff, but that is what we're trying to do. We're trying to do it fair and square, according to the rules, and doing it ethically, which that's okay to do as far as I'm concerned, to advertise the fact that we want to win. And the reason we want to win is most people, when they think about libertarianism, they might pay attention to it a little bit here and there at election time. And so when they see the Libertarian Party, that's a key part of the brand of small L libertarianism. And so while I don't think we're going to elect a president anytime soon, I want that branding. I want the LP to be that strong branding, so that when people look at it, they don't get distracted and rightly so turned off by the woke stuff. We want the brand to be as clean and as honed down to the non-aggression principle as possible, pushing the big issues. And so when people do hear about libertarianism, they're hearing something that I think is going to appeal to a lot of people. And so that's why I think that we might be the first, and I'd be curious to know if you know of any others, but like, and the LP is not as bad as a lot of other institutions. But if we succeed, I think we're going to be one of the first big examples of de-wokeifying an organization. So, like, are there other people who have done this? What advice do you have as we try to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would certainly be one of the biggest examples of de-wokeifying an organization. I think we can look at different movements that, social justice has kind of failed to take over. You can look at Gamergate, like, they didn't succeed in Gamergate. You can even look at the knitting community. They were unsuccessful in the knitting community because people stood up and fought back, and they're still there. They're still screaming and doing their thing. But like, really, there is a whole contingent of like unwoke knitting community too. And I think that we can even look to some businesses to provide guidance for this. We can look at Red Bull CEO, when who is like this, he's like an Austrian, like rich, like billionaire, right? But like when his North American heads started implementing this diversity training, he just fired them all. We can look at a place like Coinbase, right? Coinbase's CEO came out and wrote this memo that said, we're not doing politics, we are doing crypto. That is what we're doing. That is their purpose for being. And then all his employees were like, and then he was like, okay, let me to be clear. If you want to talk about politics, here is a severance offer. You can exit yourself from the organization. Basecamp did exactly the same thing. They got in a lot more trouble because Basecamp was like way more woke than Coinbase was. But ultimately, I think the lesson is, and this might be hard to hear because I do think that I agree that the Mises Caucus is going about this in an honorable way. You're following the rules. It's, people who show up control the direction of the party, right? So I think you're doing it in an honorable way. But what I want people to hear is that you cannot show mercy to these people. Do not be reasonable people in this battle. I'm not saying be mean. I'm not saying be needlessly aggressive, but I am saying you stick to your guns and you say no. And as much as you can, you need to wipe them out. And what I think what we're seeing, they're like the plants that get into the lakes and then they take over everything, and then you can never, like the invasive species. That's what the woke is. Now they might be very nice people, but you need to wipe them out. And I think that we like in New Hampshire. I mean, Mises Caucus controls New Hampshire now. We're seeing this. I think this is going to happen in Delaware. You need to wipe them out and do not give them a second chance, because if they have the opportunity to come at you again, they've already shown they'll come at you once.
Yeah.
If they have the opportunity, they did that. This is what they're doing with Karlyn Harlos. Yeah. Every single person who voted to expel Karlyn remove her from the LNC should be wiped out and should never be allowed to hold that office or any executive office again, period.
Yeah,
sorry, not sorry.
Yeah, it's like down here in Tennessee, it's kudzu. It's a vine that will take over very, very quickly. But I agree with most of what you just said there, but I want to make it clear for people that when we talk about de-wokeifying, it's not about getting rid of people with different lifestyles or something like that.
Not at all.
And I know you know this, but I just want to make sure people know that, sometimes you think, oh, de-wokeify, then the woke people defend trans people, so anybody who wants to de-wokeify must be, anti whatever. So that's why, and I commend you for your podcast where you went through our platform, and we reject identity politics, which means we don't want to weaponize identity for people to use the state to push or to put down any sort of lifestyle. But we are fine with people who have their own thing. They do their own thing. There's a subculture this, a group that's fine, as long as you're not using that as a cudgel to play politics with. So, and I know that most people let's just say there's all kinds of different people in the Mises Caucus that some of our critics would probably be surprised. So it's not about we want everybody to look or think a certain way as long as they agree with the non-aggression principle. But you're right. I think that the people who are going to want to play identity politics, who want to stay woke or get more woke, you're right. I think we have to do it ethically, and I think we don't have to do it sadistically. But I think as far as people holding leadership positions and being entertained as an option for certain things, I think that you're right. We have to draw a line somewhere, and they can be in the party. They can call themselves libertarian, but we're not going to put you in charge of the LNC or the messaging or anything like that, because you've proven that you're susceptible to this.
Right. And listen, if they want to come back with better ideas, then entertain the ideas, but have it be about the ideas. And no, you're 100% right. Woke is not about, like, when you say de-wokeify, this is not about any particular lifestyle. Like, I toured with the Walk Away campaign. Walk Away was started by a flamboyantly gay man named Brandon Strzok. Like, there are gay people, there are trans people running around. Like, no problem, no shade to anyone living their lives the way they want. I mean, look at me. Most people think I'm a lesbian when they first meet me, right? It's not about that. It is about not giving power and control to people who are going to use power and control to nefarious ends. Yeah. That's what it is.
Yep, I agree. I think we better wrap it up. We'll have another. I do want to talk to you about some other stuff offline, and as far as I think you'd be great speaking at a Mises event here and there. So I'm on the board, so I'll insert your name in there because I just enjoy your take on things. And as a recovering Republican, it's always neat to see someone coming from the other side. Tell people, so we'll have you on the podcast again if you want to come back.
Anytime.
And we'll do whatever we can to, I just really enjoyed talking to you. So this is not goodbye, but we got to say goodbye for now. So tell everybody how they can engage with what you're doing if they don't know already.
Yeah, so we're supposed to go an hour. We've gone almost 2, and it's been a great conversation. And I definitely appreciate it, and it flew by. No, people can find me. The main place you can find me is on YouTube. My channel name is just my name, Karlyn Borysenko. So if you type that in, it'll come right up. You can also find me on Locals, kb.locals.com, and on Twitter, my handle right there, Dr. Karlyn B on Twitter.
Great. All that'll be on the show notes page. And I really enjoyed it too. I appreciate you giving me the time, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds like a plan, Aaron. Thank you.
And there you have it. I'd like to thank Karlyn Borysenko for her time and for telling her audiences about us here at the Mises Caucus. Links to her article about attending the Trump rally, her podcast episode where she and her co-host went through the Mises Caucus platform, and more stuff will be up on decentralizedrevolution.com/66. Thanks to Dave versus Goliath for all the music you hear on Decentralized Revolution. And thanks to everyone who subscribes to our email list and gives to Mises PAC. And you can do that over at takehumanaction.com. And thanks to everyone who shares, rates, reviews, and subscribes to Decentralized Revolution. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.